Executive Director, IT for Change, Ravindra Shevade, Chief Strategy Officer, NEML, and Mr. Kannan Subramanian. Is he here? Not here? Probably not here. He was here? Ah, okay. Kannan Subramanian is the General Secretary of South Indian Coordination Committee for Farmers Movements. You want some tea? I'll tell them. I think if you want it. Aye. I'll just get it organized. Okay. If all of you are ready, we can start. This session is about farmer-centric digitization in agriculture. Well, I would like to underline the word farmer-centric, and I'm extremely grateful to Rohin Garg for setting the scene for this session. I think he outlined those issues which concern farmers exceptionally well. And I'm also grateful for Rajiv Chawla, I think, who set the tone of this conference by saying we can be more open about what we are trying to do. We can have more discussions on what the government has tried to do. The intentions are very good intentions, and if there are flaws in the process, these can be corrected. I think that's a great beginning for a conversation of this type. The problem seems to be that there is a bit of distress in the agriculture. It has been there for quite some time, nothing new. So when people say that this is good for you, this will increase your income, etc., well, everybody takes it with not just a pinch, but probably a whole tablespoon of salt. So that is one set of problems in agriculture. And secondly, when you write a consultation paper, pardon my criticizing you, I have been Secretary Agriculture much earlier, and I would criticize that about what I did also, so that's not a problem. Is that when you write a paper for public consultation, it needs to be in a language. And when I say language, it's not English, Hindi, Tamil, etc. That's a translation issue that people understand. I read it about 3 times, and mind you, I've been Secretary Agriculture. I read it about 3 times. I'm still a bit confused about what it says. It's too technical for me, and it doesn't very clearly. Of course, all the first couple of pages are very good. They read very well. It talks about farmers' income, it talks about prosperity, it draws a picture where the farmers in the middle, government on one side, and markets on the other side. But when you put the farmer in the middle and put government and the markets on the other side, they can be supportive, or they can also be compressing the farmer from both sides. So that's the kind of fear that people have, which is born out of experience, so you can't blame them. So therefore, it's extremely important to communicate what is it that we are trying to deliver. We may fail, that's a different issue altogether. Many programs fail. But I think it's important to understand the objectives behind it very clearly, and the process by which the whole thing will work, and what exactly are we trying to deliver. So we will take this forward, and even if we assume that the current dispensation of the paper is not farmer-centric, how do you make it farmer-centric? I think that will be a contribution that this session can make. So without much more of my introduction, may I call Dr. Pramod Meherda, Joint Secretary, Ministry of Agriculture, to make his presentation. Yeah, it's done. Hanji.
can do it. Thank you. Let's come back. That's great. So, very good morning. I believe it's still a morning. Very good morning to all of you, and to the chair and all the delegates here on the dais. I am Pramod Meherda. I before I even start my presentation, I would like to give a disclaimer, though I do not disown what I say. And the disclaimer is that I am also trying to learn it. And in the sense that that the idea of idea has been going on for almost the last 1.5, 2 years, and there have been a lot of consultations within at least the technical experts and those who have a domain expertise in agriculture. And after that, the consultation paper, which is still in a draft stage, it has not been finalized, and was actually put out on the website, and that's how everyone knows about it. So one should be very clear about it that government's intention is to put out what it itself is thinking in the ministry. Otherwise, it would have just taken out a final idea paper like we had farm laws and all. The issue is that we want to go through a process of consultation. We could be wrong in the initial stages, but when we are finally through with a final paper, we should be very clear that we have addressed almost all of the concerns. And as Chawla sir pointed out, you cannot satisfy everyone. That is very true, but at least 90% or 95% of the concerns are resolved by the time we finalize the consultation paper. That is the intention. So with that intention, and after we put out the idea paper, consultation paper, a lot of thinking has gone in and a lot of concerns that have come to ministry, a lot of thinking has gone into how to improvise on it, where all the improvements are required. What we have seen is that basically the entire digital agriculture ecosystem, for that matter, any other digital ecosystem also, perhaps is based on the premise that the system or the ecosystem has to be trustworthy. The foundation has to be trust. And the trust between whom? Trust between all the stakeholders. So it is not just the trust of the farmers, even other stakeholders like the private tech players. The trust today is not there, where if I am giving an information, does it reach the right person? Is it correctly used, etc. is with the private startups, etc. also. They also want a trustworthy system. So they want a foundation of the entire system which is based on a trust model. And the trust model would generally be basically on data. First of all, the data has to be verified, validated, and it is a correct data. And the second is, of course, the data protection, privacy, and the consent management. How do you do it? Both have to go hand in hand. So, does it move? It's not moving. Achha, theek. Okay, got it. Thank you. Okay. So the first thing that we observed after we put out the idea paper was that there is a lot of confusion. And how are these interoperability issues going to be addressed? And after that, I'll come to again on MOUs. After we had our MOU partners also in the field, the feedback that we got is that the data is completely, it's not uniform across the states, as Atulji also mentioned. The structures are very different. The shape is different. So how do we get all this data which is at one place. Now, the problem is that when we say at one place, perhaps there is a concern that we are collecting the data and bringing it at one place, and we call it a national database. I would like to clarify here that there's nothing called a national farmers database. The database is going to be of the farmers, owned by them, owned by the state governments, but we are just going to link it with, and can be shared later on, can be shared democratically with those who are stakeholders in the system, be it public, be it private. And then eventually this database would have, obviously Chawla sir must have already mentioned about it, it will have the digitized land records with layers of GIS, geo-reference, geo-tagged, etc., so that you have a comprehensive database which is relied upon and trustworthy. So that's the foundational layer of the entire digital ecosystem. Now, about the digital ecosystem itself, about the digital ecosystem itself, today what we have found within the ministry, that over the years, over several decades now, we have been creating a lot of database in any case. The database is there, and that database is through several schemes. Now, these schemes do not talk to each other. There are overlaps. There are inefficiencies in the system. The databases within these also, even within the divisions, there are silos. So what we are looking today is that first to start with these implementing divisions and look at these schemes, whether they can, once the database is created, farmers database is created, can they use it? Can they use it uniformly across the schemes? Can they redesign, reprocess, or re-engineer their processes so that farmers database which has been created can be used across the schemes? And in the process, the schemes would also contribute to the farmers database. As Chawla sir had mentioned earlier, is the data is of two types. One is that we are creating. Now, I'm using that word again and again, creating. Creating doesn't mean we are storing at one place. It's just linkages. We are providing linkages. So that's one database, farmers database, that we are creating. But there will be a lot of data which will be created by these schemes also. For instance, let's take an example of, let's say, soil health. If there is a soil health data, somebody is testing, getting it tested, there is a soil health data. Then there is a data which is captured through automated weather stations and then there is a data which talks about the nutrients in the soil. Now, the entire this data set from various schemes can actually be put together to tell a farmer on which kind of crop he should grow. So that data will again be helpful in some other scheme. So they are creating another data which we have not created, but that data will be available to actually give an advisory to the farmer which kind of crop he should grow, which will be beneficial to him. So similarly, then data from various government services, we would actually like to have this database which is available in other ministries also, not only Ministry of Agriculture, but even the Department of Fertilizers, for instance, Department of Public Food and Public Distribution. They all need to be deduplicated, collated, and linked. So what is all, I wanted to, I could have come straight away to the idea, the concept of idea, but I wanted that first to happen. Why did idea actually came into being? Now the idea is not that we actually regulate completely. The issue of regulation has been discussed. At some point of time, we do not know whether it would be regulated, not regulated. But the idea today is not to regulate, but to enable. It's enablement. I would use that word, enable. And because the data is everywhere, with the private players, with the public sector also, and with many services which are being provided by public sector as well as private sector. Today, even the farmers are using many apps. the private apps, the public sector apps, the government apps, they are using it and they are using it to their benefit. And, but we do not know whether the foundation is on a trust model like now. Therefore, we had to have a farmers database which people can trust. And that also works with the data protection, data privacy, and to the benefit of the farmer. So that's the first layer. That is where the government's role will come in. But all other things that will happen on exchange of ideas, interoperability, etc., is a word called enablement, where government will help in democratic way to access these services which are available today, and services such as I mentioned earlier, soil health data, or put them together. There are a lot of startups who are working on sandboxes, put all these data to the advantage of the farmer, give him advisory, etc., or advisory on logistics, or farm inputs, or irrigation, or even pest diseases, plant health also. So if today you can connect the technologies which are available through drones, maybe IoTs and digital technology, if you put them together, you can actually predict a pest epidemic. So just imagine how, if it is that advisory on pest disease is given to the farmers in time, what kind of savings could be to the farmers. That kind of service is going to be there when these startups use sandboxes, etc., and bring out new solutions using this data. And therefore, the idea is there, but then government wanted that it has to be tested before we even scale it up. So this idea is there, but then who will test it? So the other thing was that people are there. Some are working in digital agriculture, some startups, agri-tech players, they are working in agriculture. There are others who have digital technology, but they may not be at the moment working in agriculture. But can that technology be put to best use in digital agriculture in this ecosystem? So government came out with an offer which was actually in public domain for anyone who is interested in doing a proof of concept. Now that MOA is about proof of concept. To generate a proof of concept, is this what we are thinking theoretically? Is it practically possible? Is it scalable? And what are the challenges while you do these when you develop these proof of concepts, what are the challenges that you have faced, so that we do not repeat the concerns which have come while you were implementing it. So all this information will come through these 10 MOUs which were signed with the AgTech players who had evinced their interest after that public offer was given out. In fact, even today, we have almost 32 other offers based after that offer, the public domain offer that we had given. We have received proposals from another 32 players who want to test it. But we first want to know whether how they are going to do it, and whether all these concerns that have been raised by you those concerns are also, the government is also concerned with those concerns. So we question them, we ask them. So these are still, it's not like we want to go with all these 32 players, but maybe select players again could be selected just to have these proof of concepts done and to find out if these services that we want to give or enable have actually can be scaled up. So therefore, that is one part where we have had these MOU partners these are private AgTech players and even public sector also, like NEML. So we are working on issues like credit. Atul ji talked about credit. So just imagine if the banks, every time just the cost of giving a loan by the bank sometimes is very high. And that is, and the reason is that the bankers have to go to the farmer. They don't have a trust model again, which I talked about. They don't trust the farmer perhaps. They have to go all out to the farm, see the farm, and when they will go also do not know, the farmer doesn't know. the farmer would run around them, and then this data that they actually want, they won't get it. And even if they get it, it is more subjective data. There is no objectivity in the data. So if you have a credit, if you have to give cheaper credits to farmers, you have to enable many things where the banker is satisfied that the farmer is worthy of this loan or credit and can be given. So many genuine farmers will get it. Similarly, you have the precision agriculture. In fact, our 2047 vision, we are preparing a 2047 vision. The vision actually is still in a draft mode, but what we are talking about is that the smart farming, that whether you like it or not, whether government comes in or not, the farmers will adopt. Farmer's son is today getting educated. He's a youth who uses a smart mobile, who has access to all the technologies. He is going to use it, whether you enable it or not. So what we are expecting is that perhaps in next 25 years, by the time we celebrate our 100 years, almost at least 50% of the farms we are expecting would be under precision agriculture, which we call more of smart farming. And therefore, we want to have more and more partnerships. We want to have views from everyone, and views from our private partners also, and public partners. So we are involving ICR, CDAC, World Economic Forum, Vadwani AIs, and the PSA, the Principal Scientific Advisors Office also. They are also very interested in doing all this. And what we have done is now there is a scheme called NEGPA. So under NEGPA, earlier we were just, those were initial days of NEGPA. We were helping the states to set up their hardware and their softwares, etc. But today what we are doing is, and their manpower, today what we are doing is that we want them to use these technologies, not only the private tech players under those pro bono basis MOUs, but also we are funding states on digital technologies, the emerging digital technologies. So just to give you a glimpse of how the states are taking advantage of it. For instance, Sikkim wants to do a ARMS based on digital technology. Uttarakhand wants to computerize the reporting of agricultural statistics, land use statistics. Look at Tamil Nadu wants to create a unified farmers database. State governments are also thinking on the same line because they are facing those problems in giving services. Or take the case of Mizoram, a small state, but wants to do geospatial analytics and decision support for agriculture department. So those are the emerging digital technologies which are actually going to be there in future, and they are taking advantage of this funding which is available under the, these are 2 years that I have shown you here. So, and MOU partners, obviously there are 10 which I have already shown. Now, what are the next steps? So as from a GS, you would obviously like to know what would you do next when you have done all this. What are the next steps? The first one is that we would like to have a structured way of doing all these things. And a structured way, if you want to do, then it has to be done in a mission mode. So if you leave it and you start a consultation, don't complete it, don't finish it, again more problems come after 5-10 years. So it keeps on going like that. So it has to be done in a mission mode with the consultation of all the stakeholders. So what we are proposing is, which this may come in which kind of shape we do not know, but there would be a digital agriculture mission at some point of time. So the idea framework has to be finalized, but with the help of all the stakeholders after, and there were very good inputs today. Idea is there. In fact, I also took some time to understand what was idea. And the picture that you see in the idea consultation paper, somewhere you see the layers, the blocks, and it's a very complicated picture which only a person who has some background knowledge of IT and all can actually understand. So we have to make it to be, it has to be understandable, it has to be put out in a manner which sir also pointed out, that it's not about technology, but or the language, but it has to be understood by all the stakeholders, including farmers. So we would come out with that also. And then along with that, what we are doing is demonstrate the use cases. And if these are scalable, etc., along with that and after consultation with all the stakeholders, idea framework would be finalized. So that's the next step. So, and to drive it, we have already formed a steering committee under the chairmanship of the secretary. And there are a lot of experts on it who have done a lot of work in digital health, other areas, etc. They have experience of all this, how it has happened in their sectors. They would also give us advice. There is an advisory committee also to see that how all our schemes, programs, etc., and other initiatives speak to each other. And already, just to have there is a doubt in the minds of many people whether it is possible to have farmers database linked to all the land records available in the country, all the state governments or UTs maintain it. So for that, it is important that we collaborate with the Department of Land Resources, and they have a lot of data which can be linked to that they have a solution where the databases or the digitized land records of the states can be fetched through using APIs. And for that, we have Chawla sir, who is an advisor to us now, and he is going to head that committee of the joint committee of both the departments to have this database in shape. So just the last slide, the future of digital agriculture. I have mentioned it at many places, I would not repeat it, but the budget announcement this time was critical, and it gives you a clear thought on government's policies in future. Very clear, it says we have to deliver digital and high-tech services to farmers. But how? By involving public sector research and extension institutions, and who all others, private agri-tech players and stakeholders of agri-value chain. Actually, if you put it into one word, I would again say, it is talking about the ecosystem. It is actually talking about the ecosystem and the enablement of the solutions which are already there. So that's how the budget announcement is there. And it very clearly says that it has to be done in a PPP mode and with the private partnership, public-private partnership, and with the help of the stakeholders in the entire value chain system. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have now Anita Gurumurthy, Executive Director, IT for Change.
I think it's on the desktop.
You have 10 minutes. I have to be a bit strict now. No, that's okay. I gave you more time because I think people needed to understand what is the idea behind the idea.
Yes, I really hope to be done in 10 minutes. But I think to really go back to thinking about farmer centricity in agri-digitalization, it might be useful not to just jump into what is farmer-centric without really taking stock, as we have since the morning, of what is also perhaps yet to be thought through in making things farmer-centric. So with your permission, I will just focus the input on a couple of things, a brief analysis of the policy framework that co-panelists have done also in the previous session, and specifically how the IDEA framework fares in relation to furthering farmers' informational, institutional linkage needs and ensuring farmer participation in the design and development of digital services, because I think it's useful to define what we mean by farmer centricity. So, and also I think reflections on alternative imaginaries of agri-digitalization that center farmers' collective participation, ownership and decision making. Long ago I read this ICTD academic journal article which said that many Chinese farmers, normally when there are private players who enter the village, they don't take their decisions alone. There is a certain prudence and wisdom they exercise by consulting their other co-farmers. And while livelihoods may be seen in the dominant paradigm as a competitive activity, we cannot discount the fact that oftentimes it's also a collective and collaborative activity. And therefore, what would it look like to center these traditional ideas of collective participation, ownership, and decision making, which is not alien at all to most farmers in this country. And this I will do with special attention to the role of farmers' cooperatives and farmer producer organizations with whom we are working. I always get terribly intimidated by all these diagrams, so just in case you are, please don't look at the slide. But just to say that this entire idea of as my predecessor speaker spoke, is premised on a few things. I mean, broadly, the idea is that there are data providers, and then there are data consumers or data takers or participants. There are multiplicities of taxonomy available in the data field. But broadly, the idea is data will be made available through a process of data exchange. And this should be, again, as the chair of the session pointed out, very important to the larger idea of prosperity and autonomy of farmers. So if that's really our lodestone, then where do we go? The Unified Farmer Service Interface is really seen to play a role comparable to the UPI, Unified Payments Interface, in the space of payments, which we are all, at least in this room, more or less used to. While UPI has transformed the payment system by optimizing the underlying processes and providing a set of APIs for identification, authentication, authorization, UFSI is required to handle multiple types of transactions in the digital agri space. And therefore, what we must understand, even with our limited knowledge about how these things will pan out, and I think that is something we're all agreed upon, that we are yet to see how all of these things will pan out, and therefore exercising a lot of caution, I think, would benefit all of us. I think the complexity of the UFSI cannot be overemphasized. The second is the agri-data exchange, which I spoke about, and of course providing a foundation for the development and delivery of what is anticipated and what is constantly spoken about in these circles as the PPP model of integrated services in the agri-value chain. Since the morning, many speakers have emphasized this, and this has also been documented by different research papers. These are the MOUs, and we actually see that in this, open ecosystem, even if, technically speaking, many people can come in, bid, and participate, the fact of the matter is that technology only allows certain people with that particular expertise to participate, and that then places upon the government, as Chawla ji put it very well, certain liabilities perhaps to think about how do you make others participate. So in that sense, the field of participation is not a flat terrain, is something I just wanted to underscore. So very quickly, before I get into farmer-centric models, or perhaps some imaginaries of those, because every single person here with our deep expertise and association with farmers' movements, etc., may come up with different models, and that's really needed. We need to get together, lock horns, and determine what may be farmer-centric, not just by sitting and talking to each other, but of course bringing different people with different kinds of knowledge traditions to the table. But to conclude, there is, at least in my opinion, 3 things that we can improve upon in the current scenario, or the way in which the roadmap is currently. One is, the farmer is seen as a primary recipient or consumer. So one might ask, what's so bad, right? But we have at least 30 years of work of, scholars, activists talking about social welfare beneficiaries. Why think of them as beneficiaries when you can think of them as citizens, as people with rights, people with ideas, people with knowledge, people with experience, and most importantly, people with stake. So stake is a very important thing that seems to be missing. Farm data is seen as a national asset for farm modernization and increase in farm productivity. Again, a very important efficiency perspective, but because, as Rohin spoke in the first session, we also need to understand that knowledge is not only what knowledge does in a database, but knowledge is what I, as a farmer, have inherited because of generations of engagement of people on the farmland, which actually means that there is a certain trusteeship model that exists a priori in the farming space. It's really not something that any state can take away from the farm sector, because it is something that has existed even before governments existed. Federated architecture visions with respect to what the enabling ecosystems for farm and data cooperativism led by farmer collectives at the local level will look like is not clarified. the fact is that federation is spoken about both in the technical sense, which is a very complex area about which I know very little, but federation is also a very important political idea. Now, federation, when it engages communities, is vital because that's really what India is very well known for in its Panchayat Raj system. So the limitations broadly in terms of what people have pointed out in other countries, I'd just like to place here. This is research, and I think it would augur us very well as, to pay attention to the research that has been done. Firstly, in other countries, this kind of datafication and private agri-services for farmers has only deepened the pockets of private sector rather than address farmers' needs and sustainable local enterprise development. In fact, I think that when we talk about trust, even in a technical architectural sense, we forget that trust is not just a transactional idea. Trust is very profound, and trust is actually something that needs to have a basis in constitutionalism, mediated by public interest, ideas of social justice, equity, etc. So in that sense, it has a certain, I would say, grammar that is not just about, just transactions between people in a country. So trust actually has to be rooted in a mediation framework that has to be very, very clear. It has to be put out there. What is the vision of the idea? And of course, indeed, other stacks and other such ecosystems and other sectors, which of course I feel compelled to speak about. And therefore, that I think is very important, so that you know that somebody is not making away with the value proposition in data, and that value is returned back not only for private value creation, but also for public and social value creation. So that's really important. And what's also very, very clear is that there is something called the option value of data. This is an economic term, which means that today all private firms will not just keep data and take data, they will hoard data. Why? Because it's very unclear to people what new affordances or commercial propositions may arise in this data, and therefore it's like a compulsive greed, right? You're programmed to collecting more and more and more and more data because there's an option value about this that you don't know. You really don't know how you will hit gold, and therefore you collect all of these things and keep. And that brings me back to Chawlaji's caution, which is that what do you do to pull back that data is a very, very important question, because the question of IP will always be raised as a red herring, and one would be made to believe that agricultural knowledge was anyway codified and everybody has access to it, and government over these centuries has not put any effort to create, let's say, meteorological data or soil data, etc. But that's not true. Tremendous public resources, public value, public finance, and tremendous social resources, community value, community knowledge has been put into the creation of all of this. And the option value of all of this, please remember, is locked with the private sector, which is unrealized today, but may be realizable when a new innovation comes around the corner, which is disruptive. So quickly, our colleague from Digital Green is in the room, but Digital Green is one of those community-based farm stack, and they have a model where farmers give consent through a data wallet. There are participants who register themselves. These are players who may want to use the data to create innovations. But very crucially, there is a steward who is sitting in the middle who is saying that, look, this is about handling trust, and we would actually like to drive the data sharing policies, and decisions will be taken in the interests of these communities. So I think the whole idea of this infrastructural capacity issues at the level of the community becomes very, very critical, and we do need ethical intermediaries, and we need the policies in the first place to firstly ensure that there is personal data protection law, and then secondarily to also ensure that public interest in non-personal data sets can actually really be ensured, so that constitutionalism paves the way for all of these enterprises. We are working with Seva Cooperative Federation and Vritti, both of which are different models, slightly different, but work with collectives of farmers to really explore a data stewardship model. And this is a Vritti model that I quickly want to put on the table: integrated database services being developed for farm enterprise development with input advisories like the panelists in the first instance spoke about, market linkages, training, identifying crop damage. This is trust, because the farmers have a certain level of belonging already in that particular interaction between the market and their own production systems. So even when you talk about farm to fork or farm to table solutions, you're talking about very different imaginaries. Not everything is a cookie cutter, approach. There are very many different approaches, and unless policies actively encourage these kind of approaches, these approaches cannot stand up to the tremendous power of the winner-take-all data economy. It's simply impossible for farmers' cooperatives to transform themselves into data trusts without community data regulation. So Kerala state, this is also something that we have read in the documents. These are all out there, in the Government of Kerala website, is thinking about a Kerala food platform, and the ambitions of this initiative are actually tied back to organic farming, farmers' collectives, and a long tradition of cooperativism that Kerala has, and also very, very significantly to panchayats, local panchayats. And what is really important is this will probably use blockchain. We don't know. I mean, all of this is in the realm of speculation still, but the idea is to vouch for, let us say, traceability, where, did it really originate in an organic farm? But the whole modus operandi is conceived of in a certain different federated model. And finally, this is my last slide, and I'd like to take a little bit more time around this. And I think, yes, the rationale that, oftentimes you hear from civil society players that everything should be completely decentralized might be a very blunt kind of analysis. We do know that data, all information flows in the direction of the US. Similarly, all data flows in the direction of corporations. That is an inherent tendency of data because it gets centralized and there is a first mover advantage. The state is also the custodian of large-scale data sets, but let's remember and underline the fact that the state is still a custodian, right? The state is a trusted custodian. Now, therefore, when we think about decentralized and centralized approaches coming together, what we need to understand is there's a bulk of data about which states have to create new mechanisms, some of which was also pointed out by our Honorable Secretary. The whole idea that new institutions are needed, not just committees, but I would think that we need to go beyond and formally vest authority, which means also obligations, for transparency and accountability with these new bodies. And this is something not just India is grappling with, the whole world is grappling with this question of how do you create new age institutions to deal with data sets. So you will have a steward registry for this, all the types of data that Chawla ji so beautifully spoke about, soil, weather, etc., which have been traditionally vested in the state. Then you actually have data pools held in trust by FPOs. So there are on the ground several of these, and what my colleague likes to call community data wallet, right? We needn't think of consent as a mechanism of, one-on-one consent. I tell you, okay, you please use my data for this purpose, and then you sell the data for a purpose that I didn't tell you to. But actually, consent is an ongoing communitarian process. You can only imagine so much, right? If data has option value which is undiscovered today, you can't have given consent for the use that you never anticipated your data will be put to. That seems really like some kind of counterintuitive logic. I'm done. And I think what is important, the last thing I wanted to underline that Chawla ji said is, there are two things, one yellow line and one blue line I want to draw your attention to, which is that mandatory data sharing and the right to conditional access. These are very important. I think it's not only for these small communities of farmers to just pool in their data with the private sector. That kind of PPP is not going to be empowering, as research already shows us. I think private sector also has a kind of responsibility, and therefore we must impose conditional access. So you pull the data back, and there has to be mandatory data sharing back with the agri-data exchange mechanism, which is the authority access that the government has. Both the government as well as FPOs will have to have some stake in this ecosystem. Otherwise, it is not an ecosystem. It is just the private sector and its unilateralism, right? So an ecosystem has to have mutuality. And finally, I also want to underline that all of this will go to naught if we don't go back to the processes of parliamentary debate, the laws that we need for personal data protection, the laws that we need for community managed data. And so somewhere I feel we may be putting the cart before the horse, perhaps, and things are already rolling out. We're already seeing people running with these ideas, and I really hope that no harm befalls any individual farmer or individual or a group of citizens in this country. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. I think that raises a large number of questions. But I'm extremely delighted that you put trust as the centerpiece of your presentation. And having been a successor to Dr. Varghese Kurian, I always start with trust as the foundation stone of anything that we would like to do for farmers. So can we have Ravindra, Shevade, any ML? You also have a presentation or? No, okay. No, then I can sit here. Then I can sit here.
So, let me start with a very brief 2 lines about NUML. So, we have traditionally been building and running platforms for agri-commodities, both what we call primary agri-trade, which is where the farmer is a seller, and also secondary trade, which is apart from farmer, anybody selling, buying, we call it secondary trade. So we have been in this domain for some time. And it's not our intention that by being part of this agri-stack, that we will, enhance this immediately. And as I tell you about our experience in the last 3 or 4 months, since we have been working. This is one area where we have been working. The second area we have been working in is we also run a platform for NAFED for their PSS procurement, and which operates in multiple states. And as part of this procurement program, we collect data on land, we collect data on ownership of land, of course, the data about the farmer, and also the data about crops. And we have actually experienced this, as Mr. Chawla said in his introduction, that there is a lot of inconsistency in the data that we receive. And mind you, the procurement data is not done through our application in all the states. Many states have their own ways of getting farmer data, land data, as well as the crop data. Having said that, so this is a first-hand experience that we have, and actually we don't own this data is owned by NAFED, and we are just an agency holding it on behalf of NAFED. Having said that, and I have been experienced both the market linkages and farmer and land data, I want to just make 2 or 3 points. The first point is, while the focus for this entire exercise could be farmer, I don't think an agri-stack can work with farmer at the core. It has to be land at the core, as Mr. Chawla pointed out. Because a farmer today can become a laborer tomorrow, he may not remain, whereas the land remains there generally. It remains much longer as a farmland. So at the core of this architecture, you need the land parcels themselves as the record. And of course you need farmer data. But I think from that perspective, this architecture is going to be a very critical decision. That's number one. Number two, I think we already have an example in terms of Aadhaar as well as INAF, that there are entities who can be trusted with this kind of keeping that data together and only giving it as and when required under certain regulations. And I think we have an unnecessary concern on privacy, and I'll explain to you why. Except for 3 kinds of private entities, your lending entities, which are banks or NBFCs, or insurance companies which insure a crop, or contract farming. Apart from these 3, all input and output side can very well do with aggregated data. And it could be aggregated at the village level, block level, which is good enough in most cases. So we don't need individual farmer data. So I think that is another concept we need to introduce, because for aggregated data, we should have different standards. And when we look at individual data, we should have different standards. And a lot of privacy, because since most people do not require farmer level data, it's not necessary. As long as I know that a particular village produces a particular crop, I know that I have a market there. So I can go to the village. I don't need to call up individual farmer. I think we have been kind of conditioned by this privacy issue because of other things, like you're all consumer oriented, you're arbitrary people calling you up for credit cards and this and that, and constantly disturbing you, and that kind of, but I don't think that is exactly applicable here, because a lot of people could do with aggregated data. So that was another point I wanted to make. The third is that the process itself of data capture, and I think Mr. Chawla pointed that out, is that any process that changes the underlying records must also be digitized. We should not look at digitization as an afterthought. And I think that is very important. And this correlation is going to be a huge challenge. Because I think when Karnataka started the Bhumi records, at that time we didn't have Aadhaar. And we didn't have well-established identification of owners of these land parcels. And if you have, and I have seen closely records in Maharashtra as well as Karnataka, so many times see, these are legal documents of land holdings. And there is a lot of detail there, and it has its own purpose, of course. But from AgriStack perspective, what is relevant and what is not relevant must be identified. Because there are plots of land where there are 13 owners who are registered, with probably their share of that small plot of land. So what am I going to do with it as a marketer? I don't even know who to approach. So that is the kind of state of land records today. Because that's a legal document, it was created for another purpose. So I think, Dr. Pramod, that's something which we found out through one of the pilots, whether it is usable. And we should focus on getting aggregated data, whether it should be at village level and so on, because that is going to really help. And your agroclimatic conditions don't significantly change within a village, right? Similarly, there are fixed number of crops which are grown, etc. So I think rather than being very ambitious about, getting recording everything at an individual farm level, etc., if we can do something which is usable and through which farmers can benefit, we should have intermediate goals which are achievable for AgriStack. And I think that is a key perspective I would like to put forward, and I would like all of you to think about it and respond to it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think that's a very valid point that you have made about you don't need individual data for many purposes. You could do very well with aggregate data and still deliver benefits to farmers. I think if that could be done, part of the problem is over. Now I would request Kannayan Subramanian, General Secretary of the South Indian Coordination Committee of Farmers Movements.
Dear friends and the chair, thank you very much for the opportunity for me to share my views with this learned gathering. During the pandemic, I had cabbages in 3.5 acres of my land. It was close to 100 metric tons of cabbages was ready to be harvested. And usually I used to sell my produces at farm gate. Some local intermediaries come and they negotiate, and they harvest, pack it, and take it. At that time, nobody came to my farm. Nobody's farm. Almost all the farms were not able to expect any traders there. Transportations stopped, and the state borders are closed, and I had to go like a thief from Karnataka to Tamil Nadu to Karnataka and Karnataka to Tamil Nadu. They have fenced it. They have electrified it. I had instances of that. I was laying down and rolling to the other part of India. So this is how the pandemic impacted. That time I was sitting on the farm and was very much worried, and I'm not a very much in the Twitter. I was in the Facebook all the time. And that time I put a tweet that I have this much cabbages and nobody's are coming, and why don't these corporate houses can buy and feed to the needy people. There are many people who are not able to access food, and a lot of food is wasted in the farm. This is during the pandemic. I tweeted with a very 15-second video and went to home. Then I got a call from one of the Southern Railways employees, Southern or Southwestern Railways employees. He said, Mr. Kannan, we could help you to move your vegetables to Ahmedabad. That is excellent. But who will buy in Ahmedabad? The railways will help me to move and I have to move it to Mysore at least from my place. And another transporter called me, sir, our transports are also not being operated, and I could help you to move your vegetables to Calcutta. I mean, West Bengal. And it's amazing. And there were so many phone calls, I couldn't sleep for another 1.5 months. Because I have tagged Ratan Tata and Anand Mahendra. Mahendra also retweeted. And Mr. S.P. Chukla, who is the group chairman of the aerospaces in the Mahendra, called me. Mr. Mahendra asked me to get in contact with you. And the Bharatiya Janata Party's youngest parliament member from Mr. Surya from Bangalore, their office called me and they got some 12 metric tons of my cabbages. So this is how I was able to sell out really about 42 metric tons of my cabbages by the time. That time I was thinking, why don't we create some online platform so that we can list our produce and somebody can buy. If you look at onion, sambar onion, small onion in my taluk in Talawadi, there are 1 or 2 traders mainly buying 80% of the total produces. Farmers are depending on them. Sometimes they negotiate at your farm gate, and sometimes they say, we take your onion, we will sell it in the Coimbatore or Dindukal market, and we will give you the money realized over there. You have to trust them. The trust building, as our Joint Secretary said a while ago, a trust building should be there with the buyer. So they will sell it somewhere and give you money. You do not know how much they sold and how much you are getting, all those things. But why is this? Because there are only few operators in that area. They only know the data, who is who and who is growing what, and they are also giving some credit and seed onion on the credit like that. So others from the other areas who are operating in the neighboring taluk do not know how much is here and who are trustworthy like that. And an idea which we in Talawadi Farmers Association, we thought that we have to create a mobile application so that farmers can list their produce and buyers also can list them, and we will not connect directly farmers to the buyer. because next time the buyer will directly go to the farmer and they will completely ignore us. So we will facilitate some sort of protection. One buyer came who bought nearly about a good number of amount of onions, who went away. Then farmers were coming to me, sir, can you please help me? Nearly about 3 lakh rupees he has to give me. Similarly, so many other people came, altogether more than 15 lakh rupees, one guy swindled and gone away. There is no protection to the farmers. So this, and I do not know what my fellow farmers are doing in my own village, my own panchayat of some 5,000 population. So to understand who is growing what, and what is the stage of the crop, and some advisories. I did something during the pandemic with this connection with Mahindra's, and I have sourced quality seeds from Mahindra HZPC from Punjab and distributed to the farmers. Some 6 trucks I helped them. It is tissue culture based development and early generation, disease free kind of things. That time I created a WhatsApp group, and all those who purchased seed tubers from me, and with the help of some technical people, we said that there is a rain forecast, you have to be careful, and you don't buy expensive insecticides or fungicides, and don't mix it because rain forecast is there, otherwise very expensive, so you will lose it. And during the rainy season you have to take robust plant protection measures to protect your potatoes from the fungal infections. And one lady who said, sir, you are giving me potatoes, but you have to help me throughout from the beginning to the end, harvest, all water management and nutrient management and also plant protection. So she was carefully following. She got very good yield. And she told me she has realized nearly about 20 or 23 lakhs. But I couldn't realize that much. And I also with lesser land. So it was a good thing. So what I felt, so these advisories given to the farmers in right time, in right manner, that will help. That is the precision farming. There are a lot of talks about precision farming in this country. These are bogus, I am telling you. And for precision farming, at least you should have the nutrient data of your own soil. And accordingly, you have to apply fertilizers. The farmer should know the exact pest which is damaging the crop. And they have to know the economic threshold amount of the damage. Then only they have to intervene. And they should know exactly about the information related to the pesticides, fungicides, or whatever the crop protection. But what is happening in this country is trade. It's a big trade. All the multinational corporations, I am not fashionable in attacking multinational corporations. They have, you take Bayer, it's a big company. They are there in my place. Who have they appointed to advise farmers? Some people, they have passed out 10th standard and they are paying some money. I do not know how they are paying. They are going to the farms. Sir, this is the very good, you have to spray this. You have to drench this. You have to do this, that. So they are fixing targets and they are doing marketing. And sometimes they are calling this precision farming. This is not. This is looting, daylight looting they are doing. So, if you go to internet, you type some crop, and if you want to get some advisory, TNAU will give you advisory. TNAU is excellent. They did some time, the extension department under one retired professor, they have put everything. At least something you will know about that. But the information, the advisory given about the insecticide or the fungicide, which is sold in the market, is the very latest developed by the Corteva company after the marriage of DuPont and Dow. Their product is there, but which is not there. So the latest information, up-to-date information is not available, which is not a rocket science, which can be easily provided by the government of India or the state governments or state agriculture universities. We have Indian Institute of Horticulture, we have central institutions specialized for bananas, pomegranate, everything. But why the ready-made information which is not able to be obtained by the farmers? Because of the lack of information available in the public domain for the farmers. So what we did, we developed, it is still developed, not rolled out, a small application. In the application in which farmers can list, and we will facilitate that. And we are now thinking of adding these crop advisories from farmer to farmer, and from some local friends who are available. They are not charging. And even charging, the farmers have the habit of that they will pay to the doctors, lawyers, everybody. If someone gives right, appropriate advisory, they won't pay. They want everything free of cost. I'm finishing. So we want to add many features to this. But the one worry is that we will also collect data, and how safe this data will be is one question. And this whole digitalization, my final point is that the whole digitalization policy, and as rightly said by the government secretary, that it is enabling. The word regulation is everywhere, is kind of a bad word in this country now. I do not know, without any regulation, without making anybody accountable if something goes wrong, and if the whole practice helps the bigger people, the bigger players, they want to have every data, they want to monopolize all the data. And if you lose the sovereignty over data, that will be dangerous. And I cannot give all solutions to all the problems, but it should be the collective effort of all of us in this hall, in this country, to protect the sovereignty of the data of this country. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Well, I can take one or two very short questions. No, Mr. Jakar, you don't get a chance. You get to ask later. I think, yeah, you haven't asked after that. Oh, there is a lady, I have to give a preference. Yeah. Raman, sorry, I'll answer your question privately at lunch. Yep. But maybe all quick questions, quickly, all three I'll take. Yeah. You also have one?
Yeah,
Okay,
very
please.
quick question and need not be answered immediately, means it's
Yeah,
something which
yeah,
we need to follow. Means myself, Pankaj Pushkar, I'm representing Complexity University, which is an international task group to take on the most pressing challenge of our time. And I have been a former MLA also and a former movements associate also. I must thank this multi-stakeholders coming together kind of initiative. I must thank you that this is what we need most. Secondly, I'm just indicating one thing. There are many things which need deeper deliberation and further dialogue, but what Nankumarji referred to, that means a candid acknowledgement that despite being a lot of experience, he couldn't get the point of the concept paper and so on. So just try to understand the crux of the problem, that what we exactly need a different understanding of how to talk about, how to deal with the issues. Do I need to proclaim my technical know-how and so on, or the purpose is to be able to communicate? So there is not only the issue of comprehensibility, another is the language. You referred that it is just a matter of translation. No, it's not just a matter of translation. Shall we go for a
very stimulating intellectual
monolingual,
discussion on something
monocultural
that
kind of framework?
at least I don't
or a
understand fully, so I hope
multilingual
that I
kind of
will
framework?
be wiser by the time I
Shall we
leave this
go-
room in the
shall we
evening.
opt a people's language? Kanhaiya gave a little science. I imagine there should have been a little more diversity in this panel. So my concern is that whether official language or technical language or people's language. So I am just suggesting that we are just at the threshold of a wonderful possibility and a little more awareness that let's come to that ground where that harmonious coming together is possible. That's the crux of the matter.
Yeah.
Means I just
Thank
wanted
you.
to put it on
Yeah.
ground.
Thank you
so much.
The lady there. I think you're absolutely right. We take that point on record. I think Ajay will take it forward in the next one. I think we need to communicate with people to make them understand and respond. There is no point in putting it, as Rajiv said, in one corner of a website. Yeah, please.
Hi, I'm Shagun from Down to Earth magazine.
Yeah.
My question would be to Mr. Pramod. So issuing advisories, as many speakers have said, is a major part of this project. So how is the government ensuring that how is it preventing any conflict of interest? Because these advisories will also be issued by the service providers, which will be promoting certain kind of products. So is there a monitoring mechanism that, say, for example, there is a pest attack and certain kinds of pesticides will be promoted by these service providers. So is there a check on this in the system that you have formed? And there's another just small question. So a lot of speakers have mentioned how ownership of data should lie also with the farmer. So in these pilot projects that the government has initiated with these 10 companies, are you seeing this is there a mechanism to give this data to the farmer in a pilot stage or in this initiatives that you have just done?
Okay. Raman, you take it together. Raman? So your question is, one is, how do you ensure neutrality of that advice, irrespective of a proprietary interest in whatever pesticide, fertilizer, whatever. The second is the question of ownership versus access, or together, right? Yeah.
So this question is to all three pillars: civil society, government, and private sector. I think our first two sessions are primarily focused on land as a source of revenue. We know that during COVID, the fisher folk could not do work from farm or work from home. There was no PM Kisan equivalent for the fisher folk. What about the pastoralists and so on and so forth? So what is the thinking around doing this, expanding this idea framework for our other members of the producing community, whether they're tenants or otherwise? I think they contribute significantly to the ecosystem in terms of nutrition and revenues and livelihoods. What is the thinking? Because this is embedded in the Department of Agriculture, so maybe there are some silos around that, but I think would like to understand where is this.
Thank you, Raman. That was my question, unfortunately. You stole it. Yeah, somebody here wanted to...
In addition to the same question, actually, I was also talking about, for example, PM Kisan also, as of now, doesn't support the tenant farmers. And in Andhra...
No, he's not talking about tenant farmers. He's talking about farmers who are into occupations of farming, which is not land related.
Yes, my question in
you are talking about tenant farmers.
Yes, so tenant farmers and sharecroppers in specific, as we see, for example, in Karnataka, the land ceiling has been removed, and a lot of people are actually owning up land for, for various benefits. They're seeing that. So how do we make sure
tenant farmers
the cultivator is at the center of this, and he is considered for, I would not agree with Ravindra ji, where we put land as a core. Why should we put land as a core? I do understand where the data from a data perspective, but from a benefits perspective and from a rights perspective also, how do we put a tenant farmer,
cultivator
in the center?
That's a very complex question. I don't know, Pramod, you want to take it on? Because I've done a lot of work on tenant farmers, and it's not easy at all. It's quite easy.
Not very complex. So I'll go one by one. One is that I'll settle yours first, because that's a very basic issue that you've raised. One is that how will tenant farmers benefit from it? See, from the perspective of digital agriculture, I think you're talking about beneficiaries. When you talk of tenant farmers, you are talking about beneficiaries, not about services. See, services finally would be based on some record somewhere. That record is, as somebody pointed out, the land record remains there always. Farmers can change. So when I'm a tenant farmer, I want to know about my farm. Now this farm may belong to somebody else, but he knows he's standing on a farm. He, through geospatial tagging, land records, etc., you know this is the farm. And for this farm, if I have to get an advisory, for instance, somebody pointed out their advisory, then what is that kind of advisory? If I have to sell it to somebody who all are available around me, from this place to this place, which is the nearest place, where is the market, that is neutral insofar as a land record, somebody who's holding the land record or somebody who's cultivating that land. No, it's neutral. Digital agriculture is neutral to that. But when you come to giving benefits, because you are now mentioning about PM Kisan, then PM Kisan as a definition within the objectives of PM Kisan, it is a land-based scheme. So it has to have a land record in it. All other schemes, when they have some benefit to be given, for instance, even today fertilizers, they are grappling with land records. They also have to finally link with land records, because finally a fertilizer is used in some land somewhere. So that's important. Who's cultivating, etc., they need to know. Or there could be some other benefits, like sir mentioned or others mentioned about fisheries. So fisheries department goes into land records. They have their own farmers database. When they have to give a benefit, they give it through some other database that is benefit oriented. Now therefore they'll have to find out first whether my farmers database, which is their farmers database, not exactly connected to land records, is correct or not. How do they find out? There are many other ways. They can actually link it with Aadhaar. They may have other, and because Aadhaar Act allows, when you have to give benefit, you have to share the benefit, the Aadhaar. Only in those cases. There are many exceptions where you have to share your Aadhaar. If you have to get a benefit, you have to share it. Now how it is maintained, hash or this or that, that's a different thing, but you have to share. So they do it on their own. Different schemes, when they give a benefit, they will find out the farmer's database, whether it is validated, verified. So this is a different part altogether from digital agriculture. So that's your issue. The other thing is that you were talking about is that advisories, the neutrality of advisories that was also mentioned. Now, if there are many people who are giving advisories, see there will be many people. There are people who are giving now also. So now, once and I mentioned it when I was giving out my presentation, the first word I used was trust. If you have to go to, if you buy milk, most people, where will they go? A company that you trust. You buy milk from a company that you trust, a brand that you trust. If you buy a shirt, you go to a brand that you trust. You may go, depending upon how and what are your financial standings, etc. You buy. You have trust, you go and buy. Similarly, here is an ecosystem. Today, these things are being given even today, even without enablement or ecosystems. There are private players who are giving advisories. Farmers are taking advisories, as our farmer friend said. There are many people who are actually giving advisories. And they may not be 10th pass or 10th standard. They are giving and they are going. And farmers don't trust, but they are forced to do it. Today, if you have a system which is trustworthy, which is actually enabled by government, none other government, then people tend to have more trust in that system. And how do you do it? You will definitely, when people pass through this system of enablement, there are, as you rightly pointed out, there is a concern. Do you have checks and balances on them? Certainly you will have. Otherwise, how do you build trust? You can't have anyone who comes into the system and give advisories through this exchange. You cannot do that. So if there is a person who is coming through this exchange, gets through this exchange, definitely is a trustworthy person. If somebody who is not able to do it, is trying to do it on standalone advisories, farmers will just not trust him. It is going to be like that only. So, but today, there could be anybody who can claim that you trust me. Farmers have no way to find out whether this is trustworthy, not trustworthy. They take it, they suffer through losses, then they realize, oh, this person was not trustworthy. What it is going to do is, digital technology is going to neutralize everything. It will be a neutral technology, which means the first thing that it will dismantle is the middleman. The first thing that digital technology will dismantle is the middleman who are trying to force farmers that you have to have choices. If, like our farmer friend said, if I want to sell my product, I need not tell anybody that I have this. I just search. I find out what is the market rate of this potato, which is the nearest market, who is buying at what rate, what are the rates, where do I sell it, at what rate, if I have to go, if I have to use transportation, what would be my transportation cost, etc. He calculates. And then he goes, that place I'll go and sell, or that person I will connect. So that kind of enablement has to be there through a system which is trusted. So that's how it is going to be. So I think
Okay, I think we have to close the session now with just a couple of observations from me. One is, I do agree, I think you said it. The thinking in government, and I'm guilty of that myself when I was there, is agriculture is seen from a national food security, consumer-oriented lens. The first change was when the government said we want to double farmers' income. I think that's the time when somewhere the thinking went that farmers are extremely important. So I think the policies have to change from this mindset. We are still worried about onion prices, but we are not very, farmers have to commit suicide probably to get noticed in Delhi. So this, I think, has to be made much more of a level scene where farmers are the building blocks on which the whole agriculture is built up. So I think we have to look at what could be called farmer-centric. You can define it in many ways, but I think you have to do that. That is number one. The second is, I think trust is an extremely important element of whatever we do. And my favorite example of trust is what Dr. Kurian did in Anand. Now, when a farmer brings milk to a primary cooperative society, there are two things that help build that trust. One is technology, which measures the fat content and the weight and the price and everything, and he gets a little slip. The other is transparency, because the society gives all the accounts, they know exactly what is happening, etc. And that database actually helps the farmers. In fact, very often we have noticed that a farmer who has been pouring about 6 liters suddenly drops to 2. Then the society gets back to them using that information, saying, is your cow sick? Do you need veterinary services? That's what brings value to, and the trust has to come from below. It can't come from some stack somewhere sitting in Krishi Bhavan. So I think let's be very clear, trust has to be closer to the ground and not up above in the sky. The last point I would suggest is, I heard him say what he said, and this is really very important. In fact, what people like him bring to this discussion is ground truth. How we have to roll over under a barbed wire fence built between two states because of the pandemic or whatever, and how helpless at times they become, and they take the entire loss on themselves. So this is a situation whether can technology help at this point in time or at any point in time where they have a problem like this. So it's extremely important to communicate to farmers. What we are trying to do is to connect you to the market and get you the best price possible. Connect you to an input issue and get you the input in time. Connect you to the correct advisory and get you that advisory in time. I think if we start building these blocks from below, there will be no objection to any digitization. I think the problem is one of lack of trust or lack of adequate trust, and the other of perception. And the perception can be right or wrong, but we have to communicate to change that perception. With these words, let me thank all the panelists. I think you have been wonderful, and all of you have brought a very different but very interesting and important focus to the discussion. So Ajay, is it lunchtime? Yes, lunchtime, and we have about half an hour for lunch. A quick lunch maybe, half an hour. Thank you very much.